Thanks everyone for being here. It's a 3 o'clock afternoon on a Friday, which is already tough in Pacific time. So for many of you, that's even tougher. I really appreciate it. I'm going to open a poll right now. And I'm going to share my screen at the same time. So extra degree of difficulty.
Ben, we've got 9 participants out of 37 have voted.
Awesome.
We're still going strong. Half of you have voted. A winner is emerging. 65% have voted.
Yeah, I'll give another 10 seconds or so and then I'll get started. Great, this is just for my information, so I'll end it there. Maxwell, I bet you can see the...
Yes, I can. We have an almost even, so we have a tie. Number 1 and 2, I've had to revamp a course based on someone else's existing materials, and I will need to revamp a course based on someone else's existing materials. Each got 10 votes, and then we have a third place. I'm generally interested in this topic with 8 votes.
Oh, this is beautiful. I'm going to be preaching to a choir of people who already think this topic is important. So I love that. I'll introduce myself in a second, but here's where I want to go today. First, I want to discuss this particular problem that rarely is talked about in higher education, about teaching from inherited materials. I want to talk about strategy for sustainably overhauling systems and lay out little tactics. So I have worked with probably a couple of hundred, especially temporary instructors, many of whom I have assigned to do this in the past. And so some of the tactics that have helped them to not just build a class, but build a class that they're proud of. And hopefully we'll get a bunch of questions throughout. So chat is completely okay. If the chat goes too fast, I might ask you to repeat things. The hand raise feature, if you put up the little blue Smurf hand, I will also be able to see that. And there's a PDF of the slides now that you should be able to see. I'm going to put that up one more time just for the last few people that got here. That's the right one. Great. Okay. Hopefully these inherited materials are not just bones out in the desert somewhere. Hopefully they are something that we can make into a living, breathing course and take the best parts and leave the rest. My name is Ben Wiggins. I teach several courses. I've taught some very large courses. I teach my teaching course for graduate students who want to be great teachers, and then they do a practical teaching in the Step Up program that's very small, and I teach a lab course about the end of the world and what you will need to do after the apocalypse, like making fire or giving birth or purifying water. Those are some of the kinds of skills that we talk about. If you like degrees, I have a couple of them. And if you like papers, I have some papers that I think are really interested in this link that I'll give you later. And if you were just here for the cute baby pictures, I have those as well. So here is what I think is our statement of purpose today. Higher education courses are, I'm going to classify them as one of two things. Either you have been able to build your own course exactly as you want it, or much more often, courses are continuations of something that has been previously taught. Curriculum changes can be time-consuming. At some universities and colleges, it may take several weeks to get a new course on the books. If you happen to be at the University of Washington in Seattle, you know that it's a process that goes anywhere from 9 to 15 months to get a new course on the books. And so we are often asking faculty to take on older courses or revamp them instead of just building new, what they would like to do themselves. That's especially true in places where curriculum for students is really dependent on certain numbers of credits in certain courses. And these retrofitted courses are not just being given to all faculty equally, but they're most often taken up by adjunct or temporary faculty who have the least resources with which to do this. The biggest part of this problem for me is that we are not in an environment where teaching is as good as it's going to get and we just need to keep doing that. in 2020, standards for teaching are going up and up. So where you're retrofitting somebody else's course, you're also trying to make that into something that is a next generation learning experience for your students. And probably that doesn't always come out in the notes that you've received. So my question for today is, how do we build a state-of-the-art course out of somebody else's materials? From my home state, using art materials out of stuff that washed up on the beach, they made something really beautiful. And I will throw some art at you today as well. Okay, so how do we build a state-of-the-art course? I'm going to throw the notes in just one more time. So the question is, what is state-of-the-art for teaching in higher education? And there is no single source for this. So I am going to talk about 3 particular goals that I have found to be, if not universal, then at least broadly accepted across places around the world, throughout the United States and Canada, but especially as I've traveled farther. These are the things that people keep coming back to more and more that also are really reflected in the literature in how higher education can work best. So those 3 goals are increasing the percentage of time that students are actively developing their skills. They're not just sitting and listening to us. Now, lecture is a great way to transmit content, but only lecture only allows content in certain kinds of ways. And so we're trying to push that amount of time that students are doing stuff in class. Whenever possible, we would like our courses to be aligned with things that are personally relevant for students. That does not have to be a career, but it sure doesn't hurt. And so things that students are going to really take from the class, not some fact about the history of some political system that they will never care about, but how that impacts their political life, as an example. And lastly, and this is ironclad in the teaching literature, the ways that you teach have to fit you as a person. So we would like this course to be stylistically consistent with you and with your personality and mindset, not just somebody else's tools, but tools that have been made right for you. And we need to get there fairly quickly. So not on your first day, not in your first week, but within 3 iterations of the class, we want to come out of 3 iterations with a course that we feel students can be invested in, students are doing active work, and that the course feels like your material and your feel to it. And Candace, thank you for jumping in with, you have 2 weeks to get 6 courses up and ready to go. Woof. I have seen worse, but not many worse, if that makes you feel any better. I hope to give you something today that is useful. Okay, so what are we given from previous institutions or previous instructors? So here's a poll for you. What do you think? Oh, actually, I don't have that poll. I'm going to do this differently. What I want you to do is put in the chat for me. If you're inheriting a course from somebody else, what are the materials that you get? What is physically handed to you, or what is attached in an email and sent to you? Okay, a syllabus and a schedule, completely agree. You might get problem sets depending on the field. You might get assignments. Good, and a couple of people are saying PowerPoint slides or different kinds of slides, case studies, and those previous lecture notes. Awesome, let's see how I did. Standards, good. So here's the list that I had. A lot of what we are often transmitted are slides or some display and readings. And Phil says a hodgepodge of material. That is exactly what my list is. You might get exams, you might get formats, you might get contacts for guest speakers, but it's not like you're going to get a set of, well, I'm inheriting, so I'm going to get these 5 things. It's always going to be a mix because you're inheriting somebody else's style. So you get given that on high. And what I want you to do first is do not start reading that stuff. Instead, I think I have a different approach. But if you start reading things that are actually used and actually touch students, it's easy to get down to the everyday, especially with our worries as instructors of what am I going to do in the third week? What I want you to do first is I want you to build the map, and that map hinges on assessment. So first, before you touch any of those materials, if at all possible, find out what are the established learning goals for that course. If there are regulations for you about what you need to teach or what the department thinks you're going to teach, you've got to know those at the start, and somebody should be able to give those to you if they have hired you to teach a course, or if you're in a department. If they don't exist, that's great to know too. Same with grading requirements. If there are no grading requirements, awesome. If there are grading requirements, we need to know those up front, because what we're going to do is we're going to build an assessment map. Once you know the constraints that you're under from outside, the big question for you is, and I know you've already thought about this, what are your goals for your students? And I want you to start by thinking not just about what those goals mean for their life, but how you are going to assess for these goals. There's lots of different ways to do this. So if you laid out your weeks and let's say you had a 17-week semester, before you lay out topics, you can start thinking about what your assignments might be. So in a typical intro molecular biology course, we're going to start with a final exam, and then we'll space the other exams out fairly regularly. They don't have to be spread out regularly. That's just how it's often done. What's important for you is that you build a map that works for yourself, working from the bigger assignments down to the smaller assignments. So I may add in some quizzes to get more contact points with students for assessment, and spreading those out from exams. This is not how any other field needs to do this. So if I was in an English history class, I might think more about what the big picture projects are. So we might be working up towards a debate, or have particular papers and then resubmits of those papers. And then I'll work down to smaller assignments like small reflections that are going to fill in some of the material. This is the kind of thing that you could probably do in, say, half an hour for a class. And once you do it, then you can start to fill in topics. So for a course in hydrology engineering, we might have an introduction for infrastructure that is going to be assessed on the first paper. And then we can fill in topics. So how has Chinese history informed how water has been used at an engineering standpoint? And then how are the Chinese moving beyond that into desert regions? And then a further topic of how are they moving on into projects in Africa? And this is a central issue in infrastructure. And all of these are going to be assessed on the first paper. Now, you can build this map out for all 17 of your weeks, and that's what I expect that you'll do. But by hanging it on your assessments, you don't have to re-engineer later to cram assessments in. And this is much more in keeping with how students see your class or experience your class, is they experience it from those contact points of how are they graded. So you can build in a way that meets their needs or that meets their expectations. Just a couple of notes here. You need to be very realistic about how many new sessions you can design. And this is a big reason why we go on a 3-iteration cycle, is because if your first time running a class, if you find that your materials give you 20 good sessions and 30 bad ones, you're just not going to be able to build 30 good sessions in one go around. So you need to be really realistic about how many new ones. So in this topic, with these 4 topics, maybe I am an African engineering expert, and I decide that those rail projects are where I need to add my particular expertise, but I have to keep some of the structure, or you're just going to blow yourself out of the water. I think I said this before, but the established goals and grading requirements, you will waste a huge amount of time later if you don't know those up front. So that is the first email that you write, is figuring out what those things are. And then lastly, and this is a big one for anybody developing a course, once you have this map, you're going to start to feel better. And that's a big part of good teaching, is feeling confident and feeling like you can go into a class with your whole heart and your whole mind there, once you have this map, you will feel that starting to happen. If you have 600 hours of work to do, you will know there are 600 hours of work to do. But if you start by writing day one and then you write day two, you'll never know what's coming. And that is kind of an existential dread that I have seen really pull at instructors, and that translates to student experience as well. Tim mentions that, or brings up the point that academic freedom might be a way to override existing course goals and content. If you can do it, do it. If you're a tenured professor and you can say what students should want to learn or should deserve to learn, then I think go for it. For many people, the ability to determine their course learning goals is out of their hands, and sometimes they don't find out about that until halfway through the quarter or the semester. The amount of control people have is kind of very highly. Okay, I'm going to pause here for questions, because what I've given you is a couple ways not to start, and one way that I think you can start building and organizing your classes. Candace, I know you can do this one in half an hour, take a break, come back, do it 5 more times. But this is at least a way to organize around assessments. This is a way that students experience your class. So I will actually be quiet here for 10 seconds and see if I can draw some more questions out. How do you build in the online learning component like Zoom? Awesome. What I'm largely going to do, actually, Candace, that's a great question. Let me get to that question, and I absolutely will, but remind me if I haven't gotten there in 2 slides. Thank you for that one. That's really important. I'm just not there yet. Okay. So now it's your time to start building class sessions. If you have resources that you have that you've inherited and a resource seems useless, now is the time to trash it. Don't wait a year. Get rid of it, because it will continue to be a distraction to you. You can't get rid of it before the map, but after the map, you can start looking through your materials and saying, well, if I have to build this many sessions, or I know that I need this much work, do I even need this? If you can get rid of something 2 years. Some of your sessions are going to be largely inherited in this first time. You are going to be teaching somebody else's work at least some of the time, unless you've been given a year to prepare. Try to finish them with your own formatting. So if you can have your own intro slide and your own outro slide, or a summary of your learning goals, or even just the same format of the slide that comes up when you want people to take a break, those kind of things can start to make it feel your own. And they can be cohesive for students so that they see the same kind of intro slide every day of your class. Now, that doesn't maybe seem that important if you're teaching one class, but your students might have 5 or 6 classes at one time. And when they get a consistent feel, even just to the font and background, or just the room that you're in front of when you're on Zoom, those things can really matter for them. So we need to accept this pie chart of, you're going to be doing a ton of work, but it's only a very little bit that can be your own material. So you may toss an example and replace it with your own, but you won't be able to do that with 50 different class sessions. I'm sorry, I'm reading one question here. Oh yeah. If you're teaching it in an accredited institution that relies on very particular learning goals, your flexibility or your creativity may come out in how you do assessments. They may come out in some of the case studies, but there's a lot of us out there that are teaching courses where we have extremely regimented requirements. Now, if you're going to replace a class session, let's say of the 17 different weeks, you can replace 1 week of it. Which one should you replace? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to throw a poll at you here. Which class session should you replace? in your first iteration? Give you about 30 seconds to answer this, and then I'll ask you about it.
All right, votes are rolling in, 20%, 30%. You guys are quick. Half of the audience has voted. %70 have voted.
Awesome. That'll give us at least a starting point. So I'll end it there. Thanks, everyone. And if we share results, I can see it on this other monitor.
Nice.
Our plurality answer is the place that I want to go. So whether you agree with me or not, I think that I can make a compelling case that if you can only replace one, start with the worst session. Now, you might have some other topic that's absolutely brilliant and you need to get in your class, but for your first iteration, replacing the worst stuff is going to have like going from the worst up to your stuff is going to have a much bigger difference than some other okay course and going up to your better material. This has worked for lots of instructors in the past, is go headhunting for that worst class day, the one that seems like it's just reading off slides, and crush that one rather than trying to pick your absolute favorite topic. You will get there. If you're working from a passive state, if the class that you are inheriting is mostly just lecture, consider reformatting one early class or a class in maybe the first couple of weeks with at least a chunk of more active learning. That doesn't change things for your total design time, although it does shift a little bit more of the onus before the class instead of during the class when you're already in the heat of it. But what it really does for students is the students in your first class will get a sense that active learning is on the table. And establishing those norms for students, especially for students who are in college from non-traditional backgrounds, can really help them understand the kinds of ways that you want to interact in a class. If active learning really only comes in the second half of the class, it can feel like you're saying one thing with your words, but another thing with your actual actions. Getting right down into the bricks and snakes of the nitty-gritty here. In that class, or in one of your classes in the first half of your semester, tell your students openly that you are reformatting a class. Now, I know that there are people who are going to come to this and say, yeah, but if I tell them, aren't they going to have less confidence in me? And I'm here with a really large sample size to tell you that if you are in front of students and you are in front of the classroom, they already have so much respect for you that whether or not you're reformatting doesn't change the power relationship they feel of you being in charge and them learning for you. Now, they also know anyway. Students are going to either talk or somebody's going to have repeated the class or they're going to see resources online. And by you telling them, you breed a bit more community feel by just being honest with them. At some point in the course, they're going to see a format change and it's going to feel to them like, do we have two different instructors? And you being honest with them will make that smooth, something they don't have to worry about, something that's not on the table as a potential anxiety-inducing difference. Okay. The meta goals for your first iteration, I think, are these. First is just try to get a few hours of sleep. Enjoy the ride if you can at all. Teaching a course for the first time is always the most hardest way to do it. In the K-12 system, we often talk about different preps. So if you have 4 different preps for 4 different classes, that's clearly harder than one class taught 4 times. And then new preps take on a whole new meaning of, oh, I have 4 preps, but 2 of them are new. Well, you as in higher education, teaching new preps is the hardest thing. And there's a long literature about this. So you're not the first one to realize it, and keeping yourself, mentally together is the most important goal. The other thing I would ask for you to do is to store some optional open-ended feedback from students. ask them what they thought about your course during that first iteration, maybe halfway through the semester, but then do not worry about that material. Just store it somewhere. We're going to come back and use it in the second iteration. Okay. Any questions here? I'll pause and see if anybody wants to throw their hand up, the little blue hand, while I read some questions. Susan, we're going to get to your question in one slide. Okay, there was a question from earlier about formatting into your learning management system, so Canvas or Blackboard or whatever that is. When I say finish with your own formatting, that's what I mean is you probably have a way that you see your online course being presented. If you can't do any changing of older materials, at least just change the formatting. That will really start the personification of your class into your style. For some of us, all you can do is change the file names on the files students are receiving, but that still matters. And so those little changes will really add up when you don't have to do that work in the second iteration. Okay, I'm going to continue to fly forward here. So how do you restructure a single day of class? Well, this is hugely personal. It's got to fit your style. So Annie Leibovitz does great photography, and the style of each person matters. So I cannot give you a recipe for how you are going to change one day, but I can give you some feedback based on what has worked for lots of other people. The first is, it's got to fit your style because you're not coming back to this day of class, not for a long time. If it is the only thing you change right now, then that's going to go to the bottom of the pile, and your next iteration, you're going to work on other things. And then the third iteration, you're going to work on the rest of it. So whatever you build it into your style instead of making temporary changes. I would much rather have you change 3% that really fits you in the first iteration rather than changing 30% and just kind of throwing things together. That is a time saver overall, absolutely. Your best material, the stuff that fits your style, brings out your best connection with students and your energy. Students will often perceive an instructor to be diffident or uncaring or less compassionate. And the reason, when you really get in and talk with instructors, is because they don't feel like they know their material, so they're bringing a defensive atmosphere into the class. That's not about the students. But students only have their anxiety to think through as a lens to see this class through, so they are worried that the instructor doesn't like them, where really the instructor is saying, I don't like the material that I'm teaching. A few other meta tips that can help regardless of your style. Build your outline first. So no matter what you're restructuring, even if it seems obvious where this class is going about, here's the sections, I'm going to do this first, and then this first, and then this first. Build your own outline of those inherited sections. It will make it much easier for you to think in a big picture and organizationally. And people that don't do this have reported to me many times in the past that they came back and said, oh, I ended up making the outline anyway later. It just didn't help me because I did it last. And then last is take a student tour of your outline. So if you lay out that I'm going to talk through 3 slides, and then we're going to do this activity, and then we're going to do this reflection, and then these 3 slides, you can write out what they're doing on kind of a minute-to-minute basis. So like I've done over here for a mythical session over on the right. When you do that, you will find that you will see long periods of like, oh, I just put them to 16 minutes of listening to my voice with no opportunity to talk to each other. Or, look, I'm getting a better sense that this class day really is I ask you a question, you talk with your group, you come back to me. I ask a question, you talk with your group, you come back to me. Those self-understandings of what you're asking students to do from their perspective can really help you frame the day of class. You might go into that day of class saying, hey students, today I'm going to ask you questions, you're going to talk to each other and give me responses and we'll discuss them. And that for you, it's just a different way of understanding your material. But for the students, that's the hook that especially non-traditional students in college need to know what they are supposed to be doing, to know the rules of college. Okay, this also lowers your own cognitive load. You are going to be worrying about what students think in your class all the time. That's what you do as an instructor. When you write it out, that decreases your cognitive load over worrying that that isn't a good fit. Whether it's a good fit or not, your cognitive load is what matters for your own presentation you're teaching. Susan asked, do you add minutes for each item or just flow? Thank you for that question. I almost always add minutes, but I didn't want this to seem too neurotic, so I took them off for this particular slide. But yeah, if you can say, this one's gonna be for 90 seconds, this one's gonna be for 3 minutes, this one's gonna be for 12 minutes, even if those are approximates, they can help you see the size of different kinds of activities you're asking students to do. For an online class, this would often be, listen to an intro, have a question, go into breakout rooms, discuss from the breakout room, and only using more online versions. That palette of choices that you have to make is less expansive, but between polling, breakout rooms, and class discussions or calling on groups, there is a lot of ways you can approach the material. And I will throw the notes into the chat one more time. I'll do this again, I'm sure. Great. Okay. Candace, can you ask your question out loud, please? If that's possible.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just typing in there, just trying to figure out what I asked. Yes, I have a couple of options. One of them is to use Zoom, but no one's going to use Zoom for 3 straight hours. And so I thought, okay, if I used Zoom for the first 45 minutes and perhaps use some of these, this palette of activities that you have just so nicely put on this slide, and then they just go home and it's self-paced. Would I be using the same activities in that self-paced distance learning package?
That's a good question. The in-class versus out-of-class activities that you assign, are they going to be the same? I would probably not be able to answer that question until I watched 2 of your classes. And I could sit there and make notes about what is the Candace style. And then see, oh, you like to do these 3 things with a smattering of other choices. That's a really nice array. And these 2 of those 3 main activities, they translate really well into things students can do on their own. Maybe not the 3rd one, because that needs more group discussion. So you will probably vary the distribution of kinds of activities, but many of your activities can still work for students in an asynchronous way.
Yeah.
The activities that I'd like to put on the table for you, for asynchronous classes, students are doing a lot of reading and internalizing content. Structuring that, that practice can be really effective. So if you want them to read 10 pages out of a textbook, but the way you really want them to do it is to outline a sentence for each paragraph and then go back and note which were the 3 most important in the entire 10 pages, tell them explicitly to do that. They will also read on their own, or they'll read in different ways, but you're making explicit how you go through the textbook or how you expect them to go through a textbook. That is also an activity. And unless you write it out, you're probably not going to get what you want.
Okay, because I know that what I'm going to try to do is have weekly reflections with specific requests for the readings, and the sort of the one-on-one between me and them is going to occur online anyway. It's just, I don't know what to do if the expectation becomes, okay, you've got a 3-hour Zoom. Well, I'm not going to have 40 breakout sessions. Do you know what I mean? Like, Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
can you tell me what field you're working in?
oh, education,
Oh,
faculty of education. So
yeah.
it's like, school relationships, socials methodology or methods,
Mhm.
that kind of thing. Yeah, year one, and I'm new at this, so I'm older, but I'm new at being an
Mhm.
assistant prof. So I got thrown. I've got 6 courses and I'm going, well, I'm used to sitting around and having discussions with graduate schools personally and all that kind of stuff, but
Mhm.
that doesn't really translate to marginalized undergraduate students, and yet I don't want to do inauthentic kind of hokey activities.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Yep.
It's not
I,
my style.
I completely agree. I'm going to go out on a huge limb and say that I bet you, since you have been in education for a reasonably long amount of time and you've thought about this really critically, I bet you have examples that you really want students to access deeply, either a
Yes.
writing or a video of a class or a video of something happening in a class. Those can be in-class things.
Okay.
So we're going to do 45 minutes of our normal class, and then students, you've got an hour, and I want you to watch these 3 10-minute videos and write some notes for yourself, because we're going to come back and talk about them. Now, you're giving students a lot of distance, like, hey, you can leave the Zoom, go do your thing. You've got some flexibility in how you do that, and then come back. It's almost like out of your 3-hour section, you're making 2 different classes, which
Yes.
I think you and I both know means that you are getting some blocking between different classes. So it's
Yeah.
almost like they're hitting the same topic twice in the same day.
Yes. That's
That might be a way.
fantastic. Yeah.
That might
Thank
be a
you.
way to break it up. Oh yeah, yeah. But my pleasure. I think I'm probably just saying things you would have figured out yourself. I say them on a screen and I have a tie on, so it sounds.
I don't have time to think of them clearly myself, honestly. I've been too overwhelmed, but I really appreciate the time answering. Thank
Oh,
you.
for sure. Yeah. So after your first iteration, you're going to come back and be going into another redesign process. Now, this can be hard to think about right now if you have classes in front of you, because it's like, oh, well, in a year, then I can worry about that. But I like to lay out the second and third iteration, because it can really bring home the idea that you don't have to fix everything now. In that second iteration, you should remove assignments or any topics that you did not seriously engage with. And we all have something like this in our syllabus. So like, yeah, I always give a quiz on that topic, but I don't really care about it. Shuck that stuff. Get it out. Especially classes taught in an American system typically have something like 60 to 80 topics, where we know it's only 30 or 40 topics per term that can be really conceptually engaged with. Get rid of stuff. As a molecular biology instructor, I used to think the polymerase chain reaction was the single most important thing that I could possibly teach to students, but there's different and better ways now. And if I just keep adding, then I'm not going to be able to put in the new great stuff that's coming. And it is coming. You're going to be rebuilding a number of sessions. And probably in your second iteration, that's when you're going to do the most rebuilding based on the inherited materials. So focusing on the worst stuff that's already there, the low-hanging fruit that you can change. Focusing on covering your goals. Those are the learning goals that you think are important, because in your first iteration, you probably already touched on a lot of the existing requirements. And then I want you to think about the open-ended student feedback that you stored from iteration number 1. So you might not come back to this until you're planning for iteration number 2, but you're analyzing for non-contradictory trends. What that means is that if you have 10 students that say that you were talking way too fast and covering material too quickly, and 11 students say that you were going too slow, awesome, ignore them both. For the purposes of course development, that is contradictory in a way that you might critically think about the way they were meaning those statements, but for your planning purposes, it means you hit it right on the head. If students say that you spent way too much time focusing on Romance languages, but not enough time studying East Asian languages, and so there was 53 students said, this is too much Romance language, and for students, even if they really vociferously say this is not enough time on Romance languages, well, now you have a difference of plus 49. That's a trend you can follow. If it's anything closer than that, ignore those completely. In fact, we have our trainee instructors delete them entirely. Okay, your mental goal for your second iteration. This is the time when you make this a course that you predominantly enjoy teaching. Your first iteration, probably less than 50% of what you were teaching was something that felt right for you. You're trying to get to 51%, a simple majority that you enjoy the craftsmanship of that work. And during iteration number 2, you're going to ask for a prioritization of topics from students. So this is feedback from students to see which courses really resonate with them. And that's when you can start comparing assessment performances. In fact, I don't think it's all that valuable to think about how students are doing on your assessments until you have multiple iterations to compare against each other. Somebody else's assessment from 10 years ago really doesn't speak to that. I'll pause for questions here after talking about the second iteration. This is my waiting for questions face. I can literally do this for hours. Looking at the gallery view, I see a Seahawks jersey out there. Thank you for that. Would I give students a list of topics and ask them to prioritize? That's a really good question, actually. That's a really good question. Let me throw that question at you. How would you word a question about what to prioritize? So you should see this poll now. Since you didn't have questions for me, I throw them back at you.
Multiple choices.
There's a little bit of reading of this. I'll give you about 30 seconds.
Multiple.
And Alex, will you let me know when you see about 60 or 70%?
Of course, yes.
Beautiful.
We're at 20, we're at 30 right now. Get those votes in. Someone's saying Jeopardy music should be playing. I can try my best, but I don't know. I'm sure if you want to hear that. We are at 62% have voted. We do have a winner, I think. 65, 66.
Yeah. Tell me what you see.
Yeah, 71%. Our option 3 is the winner, so we can end poll.
Oh, so we like the dollar values.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. This is, we may have some economists out here. That is a fantastic way to get students to commit to telling you what is most valuable. So you give them $100 and you say, which of these choices? And they say, oh, $50 to this one. And the others are just smatterings of dollars. That is a great way to make all your students give feedback. However, for our case, that will tend to overrepresent really lightly held opinions. So my suggestion is actually that you do really simple, open-ended questions. And in fact, optional is even better. If you have 400 students in your class and 350 of them don't have time to answer this question or don't have a strong thought about this question, that's fine. You can focus on the 50 that have really strong opinions on it. And in this case, it might be useful to do it. I like to make any of these questions from which I might plan a course totally optional so that I only get well-held opinions. Oh, Susan, that is a beautiful one. Susan noted one way to word this question would be, what topics have you discussed with friends and family? You would ask a middle school student, but the reason middle school teachers do that is because it so beautifully brings personal relevance home. And we need much more of that in higher education. Awesome. So I'm going to go back to one question that was asked was, can I please clarify things in which you did not engage? In your first, thank you for this question. In your first iteration, you were taking a lot of inherited material and presenting that as if it was yours. Some of that material you probably didn't refer back to, or it was just on one quiz and then never heard from again, or it just doesn't seem to you to really make sense for students to focus on. What I'm asking you to do here is at least clear out some of the stuff you don't care about, because our courses are becoming increasingly packed in with, well, somebody put in this topic and somebody put in this topic and this topic and this topic, and then it's just a pile and we're trying to squeeze things into the last little minutes. Pull stuff that you don't like. And a big part of revamping a course from somebody else's materials is cutting and cutting and cutting. It's hard to do in your first iteration when you're just trying to survive that quarter, but cutting as you go forward is really important. Okay, so your third iteration, we're getting up into higher numbers here, and those 3 iterations are starting to have a soul to them. This is when you really reach for that activity goal, the percentage of students' time across all of their minutes with you when they are doing things. If you got up to, if your first iteration was coming from a very passive class, so your first iteration of the class is like 3% activity, and your second iteration was 10 or 15, maybe your goal is to get up to 30%. That's your focus for your third time. That's when the topics have been laid out and you can start choosing less of what do you teach and more of how deeply do you teach it. You will also have had a couple of iterations now with a similar population of students. Not every activity works for every population of students, and I'm guessing that by that point, you already know what kinds of activities work well for your group. Push those, the ones that fit your style, the ones that fit your students, push those and increase that activity percentage. I am sure you are asking, but what is the goal for my particular class? For a modern next generation higher education class is probably somewhere between 30 and 55%. Lecture is still a really good way to get across a lot of content. So if you're delivering content, that lecture percentage may increase. But if you can get up towards, a third or a half of the time students are doing something in your class, then that means every day they engaged in skill building. That is the kind of thing that in 2020 is for many courses a pipe dream, and in 2030 will become much closer to the expectation. If you don't believe me, I just need to remind you that the K-12 system is far ahead of higher education in how they think about teaching and teaching practices. And you would never go into a second grade classroom and see 2/3 or 3/4 of the time being passive listening. Not because those are second graders, but because that's the best way to teach. Here you're also going to be able to reduce the overall load of topics that students don't resonate with. So from your open-ended feedback, from your conversations with students, if you can pull things that they don't really feel and either replace them with case studies that make more sense or replace them with assignments that they feel themselves within, that's going to help you. And this can also include that you are improving your ability to frame things that they don't really understand. So if you're teaching linear algebra and you have to do some basic geometry to get to an understanding of a particular concept, the geometry might not resonate with a student. But in your first iteration, you framed it the way your predecessor did. Oh, you need this geometry because you need it to pass the class. In your second iteration, it might be more like, well, once you have these geometry tools, you will be able to do more. And by the time that you're in your third iteration, you've practiced some of those framings. So even material that feels like it's just, it's wax on, wax off, it has no application for a student, you started to understand how to frame that in ways that students really buy into. And a question there, should you be adding new topics? Yeah, so I think that the second iteration is your time to try to get half of your material to be material that you feel. By your third iteration, if you can get up into that 60, 70% range, you've still got a hanging 30 to 40% of old material. You will clean that out eventually. But if you can get to 60 or 70% in your third iteration, you have a modern, highly functional course that is more than not really feels like you and meeting your activity goals. That would be a beautiful thing. Okay. Your chair or dean asks you how the course is going. They're the ones that drop this thing on you. They said, please go teach this thing that is not made from your own materials. What do you tell them? Well, here are my suggestions, partially from having been the person to whom people report, but also having coached a lot of instructors through this conversation. If you've been listening to this point, you now have a 3-year plan for how you're going to perfect this course. Show them the broad strokes of how you are developing and iterating time over time. The reason that's so important is that you show improvement on a longer scale, so they're not holding what they see on that day as the only thing they're going to ever see. But also you show how you're making the course change over time. So if you were going to stay with this course for the next 30 years, they can probably assume that you are also going to change the course with how the world changes. You already have a year-by-year map of topics. You built one for year 1. It's easy to adjust it for year 2 and year 3. You can show that heat map to show them how many days are still the same material as the previous instructor, how many are changing in terms of the teaching strategy, and how many are changing in the material. Those heat maps, that artifact that you can push across the desk, can really show the huge task that you took on to change this course. And I think that these are things that you've already built if you've been following every step of what I said, so they shouldn't be hard. And lastly, you can show how your activity percentage goal is increasing. And if you have a specific example like, oh, I had a feudal architecture lecture, and in that I was supposed to talk through these 3 slides, but instead I gave students different castle floor plans and asked them to intuit what are some of the main features. That's a very specific active learning technique that you've used, and then you can deliver that to your chair or to your dean, and they can see like, oh, I put this course in the right hands. Okay, I only have a few minutes left, so I want to end by thank you for saddling up and participating today, especially for the people who are typing in the chat or even making their voices heard. I think you've probably heard me say a number of times now that this course only matters if it's your course. That's why we're trying to talk about taking somebody else's materials, but making it real for the world and real for you. So thank you for doing that work and for moving our courses into the 21st century, because it is not national planning policy that does this. It isn't NSF grants. It is people taking old courses and making them real that actually makes the change on the ground for students who become our next generation. So thank you for that work. I love talking about this. So I'm easy to find just by emailing me, and I'll send you slides or whatever you want, but I will also hang around for questions if anyone has them. Let me just end some things. Thanks, everyone. Oh, you can rate me? Oh, you should definitely tell them how good or bad I did. I'll put the PDF one more time. It's going in now. And I am happy to take questions. If you'd like to talk to me and tell me the question, you can put up the little blue hand and I'll be able to, I think, call on you. Or chatting questions can work as well. I'll go to this one first. Rachel Meyer asked, would this plan also work for changing textbooks, or is there another option? Yeah, let me push you on that. If you have the option of changing from textbook A to textbook B, and that is within your purview, then I would also like you to not in your first iteration, but I would like you to consider moving away from a textbook entirely. Many instructors that I've talked to in their field, when I ask them the question of, could you come up with 30 different sources somewhere on the internet or somewhere for free that really speak to what you want to teach? And they say, of course I could. This is what I think about all the time. And then it's like, okay, well, then why do we need a $150 textbook to be a less good derivation of what you actually feel students is important? So if you are thinking about going from textbook A to B, and I can get you to consider no textbook, so students are coming at different readings each day or different prep material, that would be beautiful. You happen to be connected to a Zoom meeting right now for Course Hero, which is a place where there are lots of resources that can do this. But also, if you can, let's say you have, I'm going to give you a topic that I think about. I think about humans' relationship to water, and I have a very small subset of one explanatory novel that I really like everybody to read. It's short, but it brings us into a mindset that we really need. And then there's a lot of different ways people can think about water. So I give my class a core reading on this textbook, and then I give them 4 auxiliary readings, and I say, I want you to read one of these. Pick whichever topic looks most interesting to you. And then when I come to class, I have 4 different things floating around as resources that students can use. That's just one day. And it takes more organization and more time to go through that. But I have pulled myself out of a textbook there, and it feels more like students are showing up with reading that I really like. I think I went 2 miles with your question, and maybe it was more of a 100-yard question. But so yes, you can definitely change textbooks, but I would love to push you to thinking about maybe not even any textbook. Ooh, did I send the link to a specific person? Aha, I did. Thank you for that. Here is the link again. This is just the notes. But if anybody wants the slides, which are bigger and harder to send, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to send them to you.
Looks like there's one more question from Candace to a simple critique.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Candace, if you can jump on and explain your question to me a little bit. What do you mean by a simple critique?
Well, I have, hi. What I experienced this past term was I had a lot of readings, and a lot of my students who are marginalized for one reason or another had difficulty coming back, being prepared to share on those readings. Mm-hmm. They got overwhelmed with either, oh no, there's 3 pages to 10 pages. And I could never come up with, okay, this is how you tackle this. You're looking for 3 main points that really inspire you. Speak to those. However you get there, it's on you. But many of them kept coming back, well, take me by the hand and show me step 1, 2, 3, which I completely resist, but I'm anticipating I'm going to have those same students up in these upcoming new courses.
Yeah. That's a really good point. And I think you and I are probably on the same page in this, but the reason students are doing this is that they weren't born yesterday. They have been through a number of classes previously, and in those classes, it was profitable to do that.
Yes.
That they would ask to be led by the hand, they would be led by the hand, and if they tried to do it on their own, they would actually pay a penalty when it came time for assessments.
Yes.
So what I think you need to do is a couple of things. And I am glad that I'm going to give you advice here that I don't think is hugely time intensive. One of which is when you have the ability to write pre-class questions for the reading and to impress on students that, so if what you really want is for people to read 10 pages and to pull out some things that they found notable.
Yes.
Then I think your pre-reading is, if you're on Canvas, you're making a little Canvas quiz that is, this quiz needs to be turned in before class. Your question number 1 is, what are 3 things that you found memorable in this? Write them in a phrase each.
Yes.
That's the whole quiz. but that's only part of it. So I'm gonna push you even a little bit farther. If you do that and you're delivering your understanding of what the purpose of reading is here, then I want you to come back after that class, and when you go to assess, something early in the quarter needs to show up on your assessment that it's almost directly from that pre-reading. So if you say, read this chapter and tell me about an ethical dilemma that you understand from this chapter, something where people have been ethically conflicted.
Okay.
Then they come to class, you'll discuss ethical dilemmas, and then just for me, just on one assessment, somehow put in like, in 3 or 4 sentences, explain an ethical dilemma from this topic. And you'll get students to realize like, oh, I got points for that thing we did. And because you're not just setting rules, you have to reset rules from other instructors. And if you can do it once early in the quarter, you will have put your money where your mouth is. I'm not just saying do this, but I mean it so much that I'm willing to grade it. And you can behind the scenes give everybody full credit for that.
And
that's a lot of effort.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's really supportive because that's what I did somewhat, but I was really scared that I would have a dean or a faculty member say, what are you doing? You know, kind of thing. And my performances came back with, wow, you really gave us room without a lot of boundaries to share our thoughts. I would say 80% of my students loved that, but I had some really pushback from about the 20 that said, you didn't teach us anything, you didn't hold us by the hand, it should have been this. And so with you sharing this really gives me courage to continue on with that kind of thinking.
Well, that is great. That's great to hear back. Can I give you 2 more pieces of this?
Sure.
This is something we fight with all the time. One is, and anybody who was in my first session today will also know that I talked about this a lot, but when you design things for students, they have no idea if it took you 2 minutes to design it or if it took you 2 years to design it. And most of us as instructors, we're coming from some profession where you generally don't want to advertise that it took you a lot of effort to do a thing. We all want to look slick. When you advertise for students how much effort you put in, you're putting on the table that you care about this. So if you say, look, okay, I'll do it in 2 different characters. One is, I want you to read this and I want you to think about challenging situations in this reading. And the other is, I've been through a lot of possible readings and I've boiled out everything that doesn't really speak to this issue. And I think I found you the absolute best reading for this. And what I want you to do is I want you to focus on this one thing, because having talked to lots of people in education, this is the key issue. So I want you to do this. Now, you didn't change the message of what you want them to do, but you put across it like you have put a ton of effort into this. And so it can make it more real for students to take up that more active or more subjective style of your class and feel like that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Oh, so helpful, so spot on. I'm so over the moon thankful for attending this class and your previous one I did a little bit too, because I've got to say, my students wouldn't have given a hoot about whether I spent 55 years on something or 30 seconds. And I know that, and I didn't take it personally, but I love what you just shared to add on to that, the way you phrased it. Thank you.
Yeah. And you know, I like to think of myself as totally brilliant, but this is coming directly out of student-facing research. So once we ask the right questions, they are telling us these things like, oh yeah, when my instructor tells me they work a lot on something, that tells me I should work a lot on something.
Yeah.
So as much as I would love to be brilliant, students are really driving this, and it's hard to ask those questions in a way that makes sense and isn't scary for them, but when we do, it can be really valuable.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Candace.
Okay. You're being asked to clone yourself since you're in biochem, and there's just not enough of you to go around.
That I can't tell if that's a biology joke or not. I'm going to assume that it is. I come from a biology and education kind of a dual background, so I'm always fighting across that aisle. And one of our biggest problems in the sciences, if I can talk about the sciences writ broadly, is that so many people come to education late in their training. They can do a really, really good job, but it's hard to get somebody to train in a field and then train in education, and then also train in education from the perspective of other fields. And so you get few people who are doing science education work from a science background who also have a sense for history education or physics education. And so there's a lot of times what we run into are problems with education that are being solved across different fields, and they're just using different words for it. But the solutions can often work for each other. Let's see, I'm scanning through the chat to look for other questions. Feel free. Oh, how dare you make me prove that I actually do this? I'll tell you what. Rosemary asked if I'm on YouTube or someplace to see me carrying out this. Where would be a place to do this? I did a TEDx talk. Let's see if I can find that. If you're interested in this, I do have a couple of examples. I love doing this stuff. I can get you links if you want to see me teaching. The TEDx talk in particular, that TEDx talk had a server crash. And so you can't physically see me. You can see my slides and you can hear me, but you will definitely get the point in the first 5 minutes of like, this is how you do active learning. If anybody has a department or institution that has problems instituting active learning and you want an example, I love going around and talking to groups and doing seminars in an active style, but that's not that, I can't just send that. And showing up on your doorstep is harder these days. Let's see, Rosemary, would you shoot me an email and I will send you those links? I probably will not be able to cohesively find them.
I just want to say that I have been watching a lot of teachers over my years, and it's hard to name names because I'll miss somebody, but you are on my special little short list as of today. I mean, I'm sorry I've never heard of you, but I sure should have, because you do what you want us to do, and that's wonderful for new teachers, but even for old teachers to see you do that. And the other thing that I want to mention, since there's not many people here, so it's good. I mean, so I'm not taking other people's time. That's what I mean, is that you credit us with an answer and a question that is exactly what you wanted to say, and they've said it so well, and things to engage the learners, and I just admire that when that happens. I think that's important, and students bring a lot to us. They teach us every day, and when we can acknowledge that, I think it's very valuable. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for saying. I mean, thank you. Like, I'm not going to internalize any compliment until 15 minutes from now, and then I'm going to tear up. Thank you for that. There was a quote that spoke to me from General James Mattis, who was talking about the Marine Corps, about how the single most underutilized resource in the world is the individual ability of each human being in the Marine Corps. And I think that's a lot of how our students in higher education are treated. We don't come anywhere close to tapping their abilities in the average class. And that there's so much more there that they can do that we're not asking them to do. And there are limitations, and there are access issues, and there are huge differences in privilege. And I am a massive example of somebody who is totally privileged in terms of background. But there are more things that we can ask students to do than I think any generation before has asked them to do. And they're getting more literate all the time, and they're getting more interested in the kinds of things that we want to teach. Yeah, I think.
And then they teach each other, and then they teach each other, and then your job is just to say, go for it, go. It's exciting. I'm glad
all
I've
the
been here long
credit.
enough to do all this. You just become the conductor, and it's not the coach. It's like we're all making something together, and it's a beautiful piece of a beautiful day when those days happen.
I think that's well said. Thank you. Okay, I should see if there are other questions.
And I think we're running up on our
Oh, okay.
15, if that's okay.
Mhm.
I think, Ben, you're getting some emails in the chat. I will send
Yep.
you.
And if anybody else wants to save the chat like I do, down near file in the chat, there's the 3-dot menu. You can hit save chat, and then it gives me a little button that says show in Finder. That might be a good thing to grab.
And
Cool,
the
I've got
last
some email
time,
addresses.
and the last time you save the chat is the one you really get. So Lorinda just put her thing in, so I'm going to check it again.
Awesome, thank you. And Deeksha and Mina and Deeksha and Alex, thank you so much for all your help with this. This has been incredibly smooth from my end.
No worries, Ben. Thank you for joining us and everyone who came. For those of you who are wondering about slides, I'm sure Ben will be happy to share them. Also, if you want to connect with each other, not over email, and if you have a Coursera account, you can do so on Coursera.com. And I'm sure most of you are wondering when the recordings will be available. That's forthcoming in a couple of weeks. We will be sending everyone an email with the recordings of these sessions if you missed any. But that's all I had to say. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Thanks, Alex.
Bye, everyone.